Bills GM Brandon Beane yesterday at the Joe Brady introductory press conference. Sabres won last night. They beat the Kings. 5 straight wins for the Sabres. All they do is win all the time these days. It's wonderful. Sal Capaccio joining us on the Western Hotline to chat about yesterday's recap. We'll recap that press conference. But Sal, how about these Sabres, huh? I mean, it's pretty great. Pretty great.
Pretty amazing. And as I just tweeted out a little while ago, what's even more amazing is they're doing it while everybody in the East keeps winning, but yet they're keeping pace and even building a cushion.
Yeah.
8 of the top 11 teams in points, 8 of the top 12 in points percentage are in the Eastern Conference. That's pretty incredible. I mean, you wake up every morning and nobody's losing, but the Sabres are still right there with everybody. And that's what is incredible. Any other normal year, they'd be buried by now. They'd be the Rangers. I mean, right? You know what I mean? Or the Leafs right now.
Yep.
And they're not. It's awesome. It's awesome. And I think Saturday night's going to be a big vibe inside that building with the Canadians coming to town and where they are in the standings right now. And there's always a lot of Canadians fans there. So hopefully less this time than there were last time I was at that game a few weeks ago. So, yeah, it's pretty cool to see, man.
Sal, for anybody that missed yesterday's press conference, the introductory press conference for Joe Brady, we'll get through. We had two people on stage speak, and then Josh Allen was there and spoke afterwards. So we'll recap what everybody had to say. We heard Brandon Beane right there about the hiring process. What were your takeaways from what Beane had to say and what Brady had to say about the process that got them to Joe Brady as the next coach?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that stood out to me, and I was surprised, and this was cool. It's cool to learn, actually, because I'm sure that everybody's a little different in this regard, how they go about it. First of all, let's remember this is Brandon Beane's first ever time hiring a head coach as a general manager or even an assistant general manager. I asked him, like, his back in Carolina, what, his involvement was when anytime they would hire, if they'd hired a head coach. He said that he wasn't, like, doing any of the stuff that he was doing now, like, inside the process. He was maybe calling people, setting up the interviews, things like that. So this is really his first time doing it. He said he called around the league. He talked to other executives. He talked to people about what their process was, how they go about it, got some pointers and tips and like what they like. And then he built his own, like, kind of his notes of what he wanted to do. And what I found super interesting was they didn't bring Joe Brady in and say, okay, we know you as Joe Brady. Where do you want to go from here? We know who you are, what you've done so far. Here's your resume. We don't have to talk about that because we've been with you for 4 years. What do you want to do differently? What do you want to do? What do you want to change? No. What they did was they literally brought him in as if he was a new person they'd never met. Now, I know that's, sounds like funny because they do know him, of course, but it was, let's start at the beginning. Hi, I'm Brandon Beane. Hi, you're Joe Brady. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your coaching philosophy. And, like, I think that was really cool, like, for me to learn, because I'm sure not everybody does it that way, but that's what they wanted to do to make sure that they were really getting a clean slate on everybody involved in this process, because Joe does come in a little different, obviously a lot different than a Grant Udinski or a Lou Anarumo or someone like that you don't know anything about them and what they believe in. And they wanted to get to the nuts and bolts of that before making any preconceived notions about anything, because he had been with Sean McDermott for 4 years. And for Joe's part, I thought that he nailed it. I really did. And partly because I think he needed to for this fan base. I think he looked, and he said things in ways that this fan base needed to hear and see yesterday to smooth over a lot of what had been talked about and felt about.
Well, I think also it was the right note to strike, Sal, that he gave time to appreciate McDermott and thank him.
100%.
Yep.
100%, Joe. Yeah, you're right. I mean, that was a big deal. I think that, for him to do that, to say that, I love Coach McDermott, giving me the opportunity to be here, learning under him, saying, there was a sentence in there that I thought was really important. He said, the last 9 years matter. They're not just wiping the slate clean. This isn't going from Rex Ryan to Sean McDermott. That was a complete shift, change. We need everything different in the building. It's not what Joe Brady's saying. He said he's got his own vision, his own mentality, a new vision, a new mentality. But everything that Sean McDermott did to lay the foundation here matters, and what they're going to also build off of and have a part of what he's going to do as a head coach. And I thought that was obviously something that needed to be said in some capacity.
Yeah, he also did mention a little bit later, and this was a little bit under the radar for the entirety of the press conference, but he did sound like he considers himself part of the Sean Payton tree. So while he worked under McDermott for years and years, like, that difference in mentality, because he wouldn't really get into specifics about what he wants to do differently than McDermott would. When he talked about his experience with Peyton, like, maybe that's a tell. Like, that's a guy that he might want to emulate as a head coach.
No doubt. I think part of that is Joe because he's on the offensive side, like Joe,
Right.
like Sean Payton, right? Like if Bobby Babich had worked with both Sean Payton and Sean McDermott, he might say I'm from the Sean
Right.
McDermott
That's
tree
right.
and what I want to do because he's thinking defensively because that's where he's getting, most of his knowledge from, as a coach. But yeah, he definitely mentioned Sean Payton. He said he got his graduate degree at Penn State. He got his PhD under Sean Payton in football. I think it's how he said it, maybe doctorate, whatever he said. And I do think that that's also part of what you see from, the very first, inclination of even Jim Leonard, knowing that Jim Leonard worked under Sean Payton and comes from that organization. I think that's a healthy respect there to say, okay, that's a guy that I would, look at here. And, obviously one of the names that's out there, but no doubt about it. I think offensively, Joe has a lot of respect for what Sean Payton has done, what he learned from him. And then, defensively, you guys played the clip coming in right there about what kind of defense he wants, and you didn't have to hear Brandon Beane say that. I think I told you guys a couple days ago the immediate names we heard tells me what kind of defense he wants to run. I mean, when you're talking Jim Leonard, where he came from, Rex Ryan and Vance Joseph, you're talking about Raheem Morris. Like, to me, that's an immediate kind of shift. What we learned different yesterday, or what he did give us a little bit, was I want versatility and to be able to, have guys that play in all different spots in different situations. And I think that goes to the alignment piece, which is what Brandon Beane talked about alignment. I asked him, what does that look like to you, alignment? Because we heard that word a lot. And you guys remember when Joe was hired, the national reporters were talking about alignment, and he believes in the personnel and the coaching alignment. And I think that Brandon Beane, to me, this is a way of saying, hey, they've actually gone out and used resources on these front seven players. And I think Joe is, okay, I want to use these guys to the way that they're supposed to be used. And maybe that hasn't happened as much over the last several years. You know what I mean?
Maybe. That'd be weird to draft players that don't align with what you are doing, and now you're saying we're going to use the players we've already drafted the way they're supposed to be. I guess that would mean that the picks were not aligned in the past with what the coaches wanted, which would be an odd thing to do.
Well, I think that we had an example here a couple years ago we all debated, which was Kyrie Elam, and it didn't work out anyway, right, where he went.
No.
When Kyrie Elam was drafted, we all said, wait a minute. Isn't he more of a man-to-man guy? You run his own zone scheme, right? And I'm not saying like that. It just goes to the heart of, I think, of a lot of what we thought over the last year or so, which is, are they totally, is there any type of what Sean McDermott wants versus what Brandon Beane wants?
Right.
And I don't want to go too far with that. I just think that maybe there's a little bit more of a, hey, we think we have guys here who, if you put them in a little bit of a different position here, they would be able to do the things that, that we went out and used the resources on to bring them here to do.
Right. If there's one thing, Sal, that I'm clinging to from this press conference, we've not talked about this yet this morning. I haven't talked about this with Joe or taking calls on this. Joe Brady was asked about, like, did you have full autonomy to run your offense in the past? And his answer was not no. His answer was not yes. His answer, I thought, was a good answer. And like I said, I'm going to cling to this. He said, you're trying to beat a team, right? I'm going to paraphrase here. We have a game plan. We go into a week, and it's how are we going to win this game? That's not necessarily, what plays am I going to call? It's how are we going to win the game? And sometimes that might involve ball control, and sometimes that might involve if we get up early. I'm kind of piecing together what I think he's getting at here. And I think to times where maybe the Bills would have called an offensive game to protect the defense because of injury or something like that. And that just leads me down the line of I think it was Joe Brady's offense, but maybe it will look different. It will be called differently because his vision of how do we win this game, how do we game plan to beat this team might be different than it would have been in the past.
I like it. I think you're 100% right. Whenever anybody would ask me, well, whose offense is it? Is he doing what Sean McDermott wants? My answer would be this. Joe Brady's calling the plays. Joe Brady, it's his offense. Sean McDermott's not designing the offense. He's calling the plays. He's calling the offense. However, in any situation, generally in football, both coordinators are going to come up with a game plan under the construct of how the head coach visions the football team and how he visions winning that football game. And that's pretty much what Joe Brady said. Hey, listen, I have a job to call plays and score points and move the ball, but I have to do it under the vision of how Sean McDermott wants to play football, how he wants to win that game, that season, everything that's going on. So yes, I agree with that, which is really interesting because you're right. He didn't say I had full autonomy, do whatever I wanted, which I think means there's probably things that he wanted to do that he couldn't do in certain situations. He also didn't say, I didn't have full autonomy, which means, hey, I called the plays. I still was able to do that. But he had to do it under the vision and construction of how Sean McDermott wanted to win as a head coach. And I understand that. That's generally how it works in football.
Yep.
What about quickly, Sal, what Allen had to say from the foot injury that he's got to kind of his role in this whole process, the coach search and whatnot?
You know, that's another thing that I learned, and I liked. I liked learning this stuff yesterday, which was, well, first of all, we'll just say on the foot injury, he did have surgery on the fifth metatarsal foot, bone in his foot. He said that it shouldn't impact anything in the offseason, and in fact, that if they had a game this week, he would just still be playing. So I guess that's, good news, obviously positive news. So what I learned and what I liked was Josh basically said, listen, he was in the room and he brought like a player's lens to the discussion or the listening process and then the feedback process, which means, hey, he even said there were things that were said that maybe people don't think are important, but as a player, I'm like, no, that's important. Like I resonate. We that's important to us in the locker room. And then there's things that maybe someone said that everybody thinks is important, but Josh's like, yeah, that really doesn't matter to us in the locker room as a player. I think that's cool, right? That you can bring that feedback and that particular aspect to it. But obviously he wasn't picking the head coach. He did say that, he's very much in line with the organization and what Terry Pegula's doing. And I wouldn't expect him to say anything less, obviously, but I think we got the sense that Josh Allen is very on board with the hire of Joe Brady.
Yep. And the injury, he said if he would find a way to play if he had to play this week.
He did. He found a way.
Yeah.
I think he meant like he would not have had surgery and still played.
Right.
I don't think he's having surgery and then playing, right? I don't think that would be the case. Right. So, yeah, a couple other real quick notes on yesterday. Brandon Beane did say that Dalton Kincaid, no reason they wouldn't pick up the fifth-year option at this point.
He's also not having surgery. They're going to hope
not having surgery, right? Remember the torn PCL and all that. He's going to let it heal. So
we'll see about that. That's what they did last year, and it popped up again. So they're just hoping it'll be better this time.
Let's hope that's right. Let's hope that clears itself up. Josh Allen was there. Spencer Brown was there. Dalton Kincaid was there. I saw Maxwell Hairston, Ty Johnson, a couple other players, I think, along the way. Alec Anderson was there. Alec Anderson was interesting. You guys probably have it, and I'm hoping that if Joe wants to play it, that it was bleeped out because he actually swore. Yes. But what he said was, I don't know if you guys heard it. And I don't think this is necessarily a shot at Sean McDermott, but I do think it gives you a window into the difference in personality, which is he was talking about Joe Brady, and he said, we don't have to walk around with our butts tight. He didn't say butts. With our butts tight all the time or something like that. And I don't want to say he's saying Sean McDermott made you feel that way.
Yeah.
But I do think, as I go back to the other day, I said to you guys, one of the things about McDermott is he's so much of a grinder, detail-oriented on top of you that I do think that there's probably some sort of little bit of weight or relief of that aspect. And it doesn't. That's what made him really good as a coach, by the way, that there's always pressure. There's always pressure that comes along with it. And I think what Alec Anderson is saying, hey, there's a little bit of that pressure relieved because Joe's not necessarily that personality.
Right. I saw that, and I thought it was a little curious just because every Bills player I've heard talk about McDermott, there's been a consistent message of he lets us be ourselves, which maybe he does that, but there's also pressure. So we'll see how it goes. All right, Sal. Thank you. Also, Ronald Curry interviewing with the Broncos for their vacant OC job. So we'll see. Like, there's a lot more to get to. Raheem Morris, Jim Leonard.
Yeah, real quick. Can I just mention something real quick?
Yeah.
The Bills, they are going to hire Pat Meyer as their offensive line coach.
Okay.
And I know there's a connection being made between him and Brady, and that connection is real. But the big reason that I understand that Pat Meyer is the guy that they want for offensive line. He actually worked under Aaron Kromer here in Buffalo in 2015 and 16, and a lot of his methods and teachings and style and techniques are from Aaron Kromer. And I think the Bills really believe that really will help the continuity of what Aaron Kromer's done with the guys they currently have, if you know what I mean? Like the techniques, the language that he uses, and that's a big reason why, Pat Meyer is, a guy they're targeting and going to hire pairs as offensive line coach. They did lose Jamil Adai, their cornerbacks coach to the Dolphins. They lost Adam Henry, their receivers coach to the Steelers. So there is going to be an overhaul here. We'll see about defensive coordinator. Joe Brady said, no rush. He wants to get the right guy. But let's be honest, there's a bit of a time crunch here.
Yeah. Thanks, Sal. I know you got to run.
Got it.
All right, Sal's got to run. There's a time crunch. I also think there's a real need to get a named defensive coordinator. Yesterday was a good day for the Bills. They had a press conference where they're talking about the future and the coach is emotional and, people are going to like that, like what he sounded like. But a defensive coordinator with some chops, I think, is the next step. So we'll see who they get.